House Stark, the North. If you were born into House Stark, you'd literally be wrapping yourself in furs the moment you could walk, staring out at a horizon so gray and brutal that even the clouds look like they're suffering. The North is not a place for the faint of heart. It's a frozen, unforgiving expanse of land so enormous it makes the other kingdoms look like garden plots. The Starks have ruled this frozen wasteland for over 8,000 years, which is honestly longer than most civilizations have even existed. Their words aren't something cheerful like, "We love sunshine," or "good vibes only." No. These guys looked each other dead in the eye and collectively decided that winter is coming was the perfect family motto, which, when you think about it, is both deeply practical and deeply depressing at the same time. The Starks are the kind of family that would show up to a summer barbecue and remind everyone that the weather won't last. They are fiercely honorable to a fault, and that honor, bless their hearts, gets nearly every single one of them killed. Ned Stark was so honorable, he literally died for it. Robb Stark was so honorable, he married for love instead of politics and paid the ultimate price at the Red Wedding. The North doesn't just test your character, it absolutely destroys it and rebuilds it into something made of ice and iron. Yet, despite everything, the Starks always endure. They lose, they suffer, they get scattered to the four winds, and somehow they find their way back to Winterfell every single time. House Lannister, the Westerlands. Now, if House Stark is the noble freezing north, then House Lannister is the obscenely wealthy, glamorous South, and they want you to know it every single second of every single day. The Lannisters sit atop Casterly Rock, which is essentially built on top of the richest gold mines in all of Westeros, and they have never once let anyone forget this fact. Their words are, "Hear me roar," but honestly, their unofficial motto, "A Lannister always pays his debts," does a far better job of capturing who these people really are. They are the kind of family that would send you a thank you note for a gift, and then subtly remind you of every favor you've ever owed them. Tywin Lannister, the patriarch of this golden dynasty, was basically the most terrifying man in Westeros, not because he breathed fire or swung a sword, because he sat at a desk and destroyed you with paperwork and political maneuvering. Cersei weaponized motherhood and ambition in equal measure. Jaime was the most feared knight alive, and also, somehow, the most tragic romantic. And then there's Tyrion, the sharp-tongued, wine-drinking, surprisingly brilliant youngest son, who proved that the most dangerous weapon in the family wasn't gold or swords, but a sharp mind. The Lannisters are simultaneously the most hated and most fascinating house in Westeros, because for all their cruelty and manipulation, you simply cannot stop watching them. House Targaryen, former royal dynasty. Imagine a family so unhinged and so magnificent that they decided the best way to conquer an entire continent was to simply show up on the backs of enormous fire-breathing dragons and dare anyone to disagree. That is exactly what the Targaryens did, and honestly, it worked spectacularly for about 300 years. The Targaryens didn't just rule Westeros, they reshaped it entirely, forging 7 squabbling kingdoms into one realm through sheer dragonfire and audacity. Their words are fire and blood, which is either the most metal family motto ever written, or a very blunt description of their entire governing philosophy, probably both. They also had a rather interesting tradition of keeping the bloodline pure by marrying within the family, which, as history very clearly demonstrates, produces both absolute genius and absolute madness in roughly equal measure. Aegon the Conqueror was a visionary. The Mad King Aerys was a catastrophe. Daenerys was a liberator who became the very thing she swore to destroy. Jon Snow was so noble he didn't even want the throne, which in Westeros is basically disqualifying. They burned brightly, they burned everything around them, and then they burned themselves out. Fire and blood indeed. House Baratheon, the Stormlands. House Baratheon was essentially born from a man so physically enormous and so furiously aggressive that the storms of the Stormlands felt like a personal brand rather than a weapon pattern. Robert Baratheon led a rebellion that toppled 300 years of Targaryen rule, essentially because the woman he loved was taken from him, which is either the most romantic or most reckless reason to start a war in recorded history. Their words are, "Ours is the fury." And if you've ever watched Robert Baratheon smash anything or anyone within arm's reach, you'll know that this is not a metaphor. This is a live demonstration. The tragedy of the Baratheons is that they won the war and had absolutely no idea what to do with the peace. Robert became a drunk haunted by a ghost. His brother Stannis became so rigidly obsessed with rightful succession that he burned his own daughter alive for it, which is the kind of decision that tends to haunt a legacy. Renly had the charm and charisma to be a great king, and died before he ever got the chance. The Baratheons were like a fire that burned so intensely and so completely that there was nothing left of them by the end. A house built on fury, undone by it entirely. House Greyjoy, the Iron Islands. If the other houses were competing in a luxury lifestyle competition, then House Greyjoy showed up without an invitation, flipped the banquet table, and declared that everything on it was theirs now because they took it with their own two hands, and that's the only currency that matters. The Greyjoys hail from the Iron Islands, which are essentially a collection of cold, bleak, wave-battered rocks that look like the world's least appealing vacation destination. The Iron Islanders live by a code called the Old Way, which basically means you don't earn things, you take them. They don't pay for things with gold, they pay the iron price, which is the price of blood and violence. Their words are, "We do not sow," which is a very poetic way of saying they have absolutely no interest in farming, building, or creating anything when they can simply raid someone who already did all that hard work. Balon Greyjoy tried to win his independence twice and failed both times. Theon Greyjoy spent the entire series having a complete identity crisis between being a Stark and being a Greyjoy before finally finding himself at the worst possible moment. Yara was frankly the most competent person in the entire family, and the Iron Islands still couldn't get out of their own way long enough to let her prove it. The Greyjoys are a house defined entirely by what they refuse to do and what they refuse to become. House Tyrell, the Reach. Now, if you want to talk about a house that absolutely understood the assignment when it came to power, wealth, and playing the game with a smile on their face, then look no further than House Tyrell of the Reach. While other houses were busy stabbing each other in dark hallways and fighting wars over frozen wastelands, the Tyrells were sitting in Highgarden surrounded by flowers, the most fertile land in all of Westeros, and enough grain to feed the entire continent. Their words are, "growing strong," which compared to "winter is coming" and "fire and blood" sounds almost aggressively cheerful. But don't let the roses fool you. Olenna Tyrell, the Queen of Thorns, was quite possibly the sharpest political mind in Westeros, and she operated entirely through wit, manipulation, and the kind of devastating one-liners that made even Tywin Lannister visibly uncomfortable. Margaery Tyrell turned kindness into a weapon so effective she had an entire city eating out of her hand. The Tyrells understood something that most houses never figured out, that the real power isn't always the person on the throne. It's the person who controls the food, the money, and the narrative. They just happen to do all of that while being impossibly charming about it. House Martell, Dorne. Down in the southernmost corner of Westeros, where the sun beats down mercilessly and the entire landscape looks like it's daring you to try something, you'll find House Martell of Dorne. And Dorne is different in ways that go far beyond the weather. It's the only kingdom that the Targaryens ever actually conquered through fire and dragons, because the Dornish simply refused to fight them on their terms. They melted into the deserts and the mountains and made the conquest so exhausting and so costly that eventually the Targaryens just gave up and negotiated instead. Their words are unbowed, unbent, unbroken. And the Dornish genuinely mean every single syllable of it. Dorne also has entirely different customs from the rest of Westeros. Women can inherit equally, paramours are socially accepted, and the entire culture operates on a kind of passionate intensity that make the northern houses look like they've been emotionally refrigerated. Oberyn Martell showed up to the King's Landing radiating the specific energy of a man who has never once in his life been told no and simply decided that wasn't going to change. He was brilliant, dangerous, sensual, and walked directly into the one trap his own passion couldn't let him avoid. The Martells burned differently from the Targaryens, not with dragons, but with a slow and patient fire that never quite goes out. House Arryn, the Vale. Perched impossibly high in the mountains of the moon, so high that the clouds literally pass beneath the castle walls, sits the Eyrie, home of House Arryn. The Vale is arguably the most naturally defensive territory in all of Westeros, because the only way in or out is through a mountain pass so treacherous that most armies take one look at it and decide the whole invasion wasn't worth it. Their words are, "as high as honor," which sounds noble and aspirational, until you meet Lysa Arryn, who was breastfeeding her 8-year-old son. House Arryn should have been one of the most powerful players in the entire game. Jon Arryn was the hand of the king who started unraveling the Lannister secrets, and then died suspiciously before he could tell anyone. His death was the thread that started unraveling everything. The Vale had the men, the mountains, and the resources to sit out the entire war of 5 kings in perfect safety, which is exactly what they did for most of the series, making House Arryn either the wisest house in Westeros or the most frustrating, depending entirely on your perspective. House Tully, the Riverlands. If you were unfortunate enough to be born into House Tully, then congratulations, you live in the Riverlands, which is the Westeros equivalent of being the kid at school whose house is directly between 2 rival neighborhoods and gets caught in literally every single fight. The Riverlands sit at the geographic center of the continent, which sounds strategically valuable right up until you realize it means every single army marching anywhere has to march directly through your home. Their words are family, duty, honor, which is a beautiful sentiment and also a description of the impossible tightrope the Tullys walk in every single political crisis. Hoster Tully spent his life brokering alliances and marrying his children into powerful houses to protect the territory that cannot protect itself. Catelyn Tully carried the weight of that motto on her shoulders through every devastating choice she made. Edmure Tully was a genuinely good man who was perpetually in over his head in a world that had absolutely no patience for genuinely good men. The Riverlands are the most fought over, most burned, most devastated territory in all of Westeros, and House Tully endures it with a stubborn insistence on the value of family, duty, and honor, even as the world tears everything around them apart. Whether that makes them admirable or heartbreaking probably depends on which scene you're watching.